The most famous of all East Anglia's legends, and the perfect way to end our Halloween specials, is that of Black Shuck, a large, red-eyed hellhound that stalks the country lanes and coastlines of the area. Tales of black dogs are far from a local idea, with stories and sightings coming from all across the UK, Europe, and North America, with many different interpretations, from the Wild Hunt to the Michigan Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, and the Chupacabra. The idea of a shuck in East Anglia has been around for centuries, with the name originating from the Anglo-Saxon word shucker, which means fiend or devil, with some theories believing the black shuck was the black hound of Odin that came ashore in East Anglia with the invading Vikings. Sightings or attacks from the far past in the area are sadly lost to history, especially with seeing the hound being seen as an omen of death or evil. The black shuck is often described as such, although there is a debate over how many eyes the creature is said to have. He takes the form of a huge black dog and prowls the dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths where, although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once should you see him, by his fiery eye. He has but one, and that, like a cyclops, is in the middle of his head. But such an encounter might bring you the worst of luck. It is even said that to meet him is to be warned that your death will occur before the end of the year. So you do well to shut your eyes if you hear him howl. Shut them, even if you are uncertain whether it is the dog fiend or the voice in the wind you hear. You should never set eyes on our Norfolk Snarlio. Possibly, the earliest recording of a sighting in East Anglia is more a sighting of the Wild Hunt than the traditional lone black shuck, and would be reported in the Peterborough Abbey record in 1127. But as it falls within the traditional area of the shuck, I will cover it. Let no one be surprised at the truth we are about to relate, for it was common knowledge throughout the whole country that immediately after Abbot Henry of Porto arrived at Peterborough Abbey, it was the Sunday when they sung Exulsware, and many men both saw and heard a great number of huntsmen hunting. These huntsmen were black, huge and hideous. They rode on black horses and on black he-goats, and their hounds were jet black, with their eyes like saucers and horrible. This was seen in the very deer park of the town of Peterborough, and in all the woods that stretched from that same town to Stamford, and at night the monks heard them shouting and winding their horns. Reliable witnesses who kept watch in the night declared there might have been as many as 20 or 30 of them winding their horns as near as they could tell. This was seen and heard from the time of his arrival all through Lent right up to Easter. The most well-known tale in the Shuck myth is the attack on the two churches at Bungay and Blythburgh, some 13 miles apart, on the 4th of August 1577. During a thunderstorm, the Shuck is said to have come crashing through the doors of the Holy Trinity Church, locally known as the Cathedral of the Fens due to its size, in Blythburgh, ran up the nave past the congregation, killed a man and a boy, which caused the church's steeple to collapse, before running out again, leaving burn marks on the door in the shape of its claws, which are still visible to this day. The attack on St Mary's Church in Bungay is very similar, and was recorded by clergyman Abraham Fleming in a manuscript which came to be known as A Strange and Terrible Wanderer a year later. This black dog, or devil in such a likeness, passed between two persons as they were kneeling upon their knees and occupied in prayer, and as it seemed wrung the necks of both of them in one instance, clenched backwards, as so much as even at the moment they kneeled they strangely died. After the attack on the two worshippers, the Shuck is said to have left the church in Bungay much as it did in Blythburgh. It is often believed that Fleming was in the area at the time and wrote these reports from fresh accounts, but this is untrue. At this time he was living in either London or Cambridge as a well-regarded editor and translator. His work would have been taken from oral accounts of what had happened, meaning many things had time to be exaggerated by the time they reached him. A more contemporary theory, especially for the incident at Blythburgh, is that during the storm the church was struck by lightning, leading to the collapse of the steeple and the deaths of members of the congregation inside. The damage to the church is documented and wouldn't be fully repaired until 1782. This, mixed with the high stress and fear of the paranormal at the time, with East Anglia going through a particularly violent set of witch hunts, it is no shock that stories of this evil striking back against God were going to be on the rise. These two sightings are certainly the most famous and definitely the most dramatic, but over the centuries there would be other claimed sightings of the Shuck. Stories with less detail that seem to feature the Shuck, or have at least been attributed to it, have at times shown a far different, more benevolent side, especially towards lost or vulnerable women, from guiding them out of the dangers of the fens when lost at night, to a story from Cambridgeshire, where the Hound is said to have appeared and killed a friar who was going to force himself upon a local girl. A tale that fits far more in the established legend is one from 1893, where, near the parish of Rocklands in Norfolk, while travelling by horse and cart at night, a man and his companion were confronted by the large hound standing in the middle of the pathway. The passenger, overcome with fear, pleaded for the driver to turn round and find another way home, but undeterred, the driver pushed on towards the unmoving hound. The moment the horse made contact with it, it vanished to a burst of heat and flame, leaving nothing but the stench of sulphur behind. It would not be very long until the driver of the cart was dead, possibly forfeit for his actions that night. As with many legends, the dawn of the 20th century seemed to decrease Shuck sightings considerably, and they would certainly become far less chaotic. In the 1930s, a midwife would say she was followed near the village of Tolleshunt Darcy by a large hound whose steps made no sound, and no matter how fast she pedalled, it would stay close behind her before vanishing as she reached the edge of the village. I do recall from a book I read several years ago that during the Second World War, a member of the US Army Air Corps and his lady friend were spending a night in a small house in the woods in Cambridgeshire, and they were kept awake all night in terror as a huge dog pounded against the walls and the doors trying to get in, only to vanish in the morning sun. I've not been able to find any record of this during my research for this presentation, and I subsequently cannot find the book either. If anyone has any info on this story, I'd really like to hear about it. Sightings of the Shuck do still happen, but as I have said, they seem to have lost their viciousness over the years, now becoming far more passing glimpses in the distance by the coasts and the marshes, or by the sides of the road, such as in Cambridgeshire, where a large black dog is seen to be crossing the A10 near the Great River Ouse. In more modern times, the Black Shuck has become part of pop culture, with songs, films and books made with creatures that are based on the Black Shuck in some form or another, such as Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. There is also a gin company named after it which is based in Norfolk. The Black Shuck is also set to be a mini-boss in the new upcoming Assassin's Creed game Valhalla, and can be found in the game's interpretation of East Anglia. It is here that for a long time the story of the Shuck would end, as simply a bit of folklore, with no basing in fact. But this would change in May 2014, during an excavation in the ruins of Liston Abbey in Suffolk. The remains of a large dog would be uncovered. It would have stood 7 foot tall, standing on its hind legs. Carbon dating places the remains to after the time of the famous attacks on the churches, but maybe some of the later sightings in the area were based on more fact than they were fiction. In more rural parts of the area, talk of the Shuck is still frowned upon by some, and has brought silence to many smaller pubs at night if brought up. Poet and author Martin Newell discovered similar when doing research on the topic and being told, well, be careful, when telling a shopkeeper about his latest work. Clearly, in some areas, shadows of the Shuck still loom large. Do you have any more stories about the Shuck, or similar creatures from where you are from? I'd be interested in hearing about it, so please comment. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. This was the Black Shuck, the terror of East Anglia, and although a legend, this is a little bit of history. Happy Halloween.